this week's a little bit different than past weeks in terms of news because I was a little bit of a part of it. If people hadn't caught up with this, I was fired as my role as a contributor on MSNBC. I was not one of the more prominent contributors on that network, but I would go on usually once a week on the Chris Hayes program, and I had been a paid per appearance contributor for, I believe, 3 years. I've been on MSNBC as a commentator since 2004. At one point, I filled in for Keith Olbermann back right before he left the network. I filled in for Chris Hayes when he had his weekend show, and it was based upon a tweet that I had tweeted in 2009 in response to attempts to rehabilitate Roman Polanski's record and invite him back to the country. There was a petition going around in Hollywood, and I tweeted out a fairly racy piece of satire, which was that forget about Polanski, and I'm paraphrasing. If my daughter, however, if my daughter is ever raped, I hope it's by a much older man who has a great sense of mise en scene, which was to express my outrage at this. And I got a call from MSNBC that Mike Cernovich, the Pizzagate progenitor, I guess, and the white supremacy guy, and the guy who denies a date rape, and I could go on, who was actually charged with rape and pled down to a misdemeanor assault. That guy apparently had highlighted my tweet, and they decided to fire me because they were afraid of the bad publicity. I had other tweets that, if people didn't get the original piece of the intent of that satire, that supported it. But so that's the story. And there's a bigger story to this. I think, Digby, you've been following the corporate media over the past 15, 20 years in a similar fashion as I have. And this is an ongoing problem.
Oh, it certainly is. I mean, let's just take a little bit of a historical look at how this works. I mean, this goes back, as far as I can tell, back to the early 90s. And some of the players who are playing today in this pool were playing in it back then. I'm thinking specifically of a guy by the name of David Bossie, who was the deputy campaign manager for Donald Trump and the head of a group called Citizens United, which is the group that took the case to the Supreme Court that unleashed all that corporate money and big money into the election system, which was about a hit job movie that had been done about Hillary Clinton back in 2008. This has been his job since the early 1990s. He has put out spurious rumors and basically, injected bad faith accusations into the mainstream about liberals, progressives, and Democrats in office. And it's been tremendously successful for the reason that you cite. It's because the mainstream media has never, ever figured out how to deal with it, or actually I shouldn't even put it that way. They've expressed no desire to deal with it. They are perfectly happy to go along with this stuff, whether it's, being fed this kind of juicy information about some people that about certain public figures or politicians that, really has no basis in fact, but they, it sounds good. There's just enough of it to kind of give them a news peg and they run with it. They also are completely cowardly when it comes to attacks on members of their own teams when the right wing does this. And, this has been a style that's been going on for 25 years, at least. I mean, some of this goes back into the Nixon years of, what they called rat fucking back in the early 70s. But this particular mode really took off in the early 90s, and it's been a feature of their political style ever since then. In the Obama years, this was very much illustrated by James O'Keefe and Project Veritas, who is still out there doing this. They're complete fools. They're idiots, but they accomplished some very, very important things in the Obama years. They took down a group called Acorn, which was a very effective group for voter registration and in urban areas, helping out the poor, working as an advocacy group for Democrats. They took them out with a phonied up, doctored up set of videos that not only the media but the Democratic establishment, panicked when they saw it and basically destroyed the group. They did the same thing with a woman named Shirley Sherrod, who they doctored up. Breitbart and his group, in affiliation with O'Keefe, doctored up a tape of her saying something that wasn't true, and everybody panicked and dropped her immediately. This is, they have this amazing ability to to scare the hell out of everybody, and for whatever reason, the mainstream media and the Democratic Party never seem to learn that they're being played for fools, and it happens over and over again. And in this era of Trump, this is a vicious group now. This guy that went after you, Sam, is particularly, he is a very vicious guy who is putting together conspiracy theories beyond anything we've ever seen before. He was the guy behind Pizzagate. So the fact that MSNBC would fall for that in a clear case, this is not even debatable. It was total satire. You were actually making the opposite argument of what they're claiming you made. It's obvious to anyone with a brain. This is creeping cretinism as far as I'm concerned, the inability to actually deal with reality anymore. And there's MSNBC just kind of running along with it. It's absolutely terrifying to me that they wouldn't protect you in that situation. If they won't, who will?
And this is the fundamental point in my mind that you're making here, and it's not even it's not even a question of protection. It's a question, it seems to me, of assessment. We got to take a break, but Digby, when we come back, I want to talk about this, because this is that fundamental point. Look, I'm happy not to have to shave as often and whatnot, but the problem here is so much greater and larger than my situation, and it has implications for our entire society. And I think you've touched on it. I want to talk about it a little bit more when we come back. There's obviously a lot more happening in the news. This really what is going to be devastating tax so-called reform that is at least working its way through the House and the Senate. We will talk about that, of course, later in the show, but I want to take a quick break. I want to come back and continue this conversation. I'm talking to the great Digby, Heather Parton. I'm Sam Seder. This is Ring of Fire Radio.